Now, 3 months ago, a 5-year-old girl known for cultural reasons as Kumanjayi Little Baby was killed in Alice Springs. Her death then sparked outrage. The issue of child protection in the Northern Territory has been contested for decades. There are currently more than 800 children in out-of-home care. The majority of them are Indigenous, but are not living with Indigenous families. Overnight, the NT Parliament passed changes to its child safety legislation, described by them as the most significant overhaul in a generation. Robyn is the Northern Territory's Child Protection Minister. I spoke to her earlier. Minister, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
How will these new laws, in your view, help or save children in the Northern Territory who are at risk?
Well, the simple fact is, Sarah, that by elevating and ensuring that safety is the absolute front and centre principle that needs to be considered, where we've previously had situations where there hasn't been any step-in intervention, that will now occur much sooner than we've currently been seeing. So over the past few months, I've been reviewing a number of cases, and what became increasingly evident to me was that even though there had been multiple red flags raised, action hadn't been taken because they simply didn't meet what was considered to be the threshold for intervention, because most of the intervention was at that very serious end. So by having safety in there and taking into account the exposure of children to DV, for example, the exposure of alcohol-fueled behaviour, which really creates an unsafe environment, then we'll be able to step in much sooner and start to do the work with those families to try and rectify the situation.
Is it your contention that children in the Northern Territory have been kept in dangerous circumstances because of too much emphasis on the importance of Indigenous children being cared for in kinship care?
I think there's certainly been a distortion of what the principles that underpin what you should do with children in care, particularly Aboriginal children. I think it's made it really difficult for caseworkers to navigate what they could and couldn't do. And we really are working to make it very clear what the priorities should be and the elements that they can approach to step in much sooner. So, for example, there's cases of reports being made, an investigation being undertaken, nothing found to be of concern under the harm and exploitation requirement of what was the legislation. And so those cases were closed. Whereas with safety being the absolute paramount concern, we will be able to step in and work with families under family responsibility agreements, referrals to other services, and the whole intent of this is as much as possible to keep those children with their families safely and keep them connected to their family if it's not possible for them to remain living with them.
Now, you acknowledge, as you did in your speech to Parliament, the deep sensitivities around the removal of Indigenous children. Does this bill make it more likely that Indigenous children will be removed from their families?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There has been zero lowering of the threshold. In actual fact, what it will do is make our department more accountable to the work that they have to do to keep those families connected and together. The introduction of proactive efforts and the emphasis that the CE must make sure that that work is done means there's an accountability at department level that hasn't existed previously.
In their submission to the inquiry into these new laws, very distinguished experts, Marcia Langton and Fiona Stanley, say the key issue in the Northern Territory is the failure of the government to commit resources to early intervention for vulnerable families. Shouldn't that be your first focus on preventing these situations arising in the first place?
No, I don't actually accept the truth of that statement. There is a significant number of programs. There's a lot of funding given to non-government organisations. A huge amount of work is done to support families when they are in difficult circumstances.
Do you accept? I'll just jump in, if I may, Minister. I just want to jump in because some of their criticism is around the fact that a lot of that funding goes to non-Indigenous organisations. It would be more effective if more money were to go to Indigenous-run organisations. Do you accept that principle?
Most of the organisations that I deal with in the areas that work in child protection are, in fact, Indigenous organisations. Some of the highest profile ones that are funded to provide these services are absolutely organisations that are owned and operated by Indigenous controlled controlled groups. And the non-government organisations who aren't specifically Indigenous, I can be absolutely categorical in saying that their commitment to working with Indigenous communities is absolute. They also make sure that they are proactive, they work together, they listen to those communities, particularly in our more remote areas, because they know that if they don't have any opportunity to get involved.
In the year 24-25, that's the first one that the government that you're part of was in office. Of the children in out-of-home care, 889, only 100 were in kinship care, 420 were in purchased home care. Why is the government relying on paid care, often paid to strangers to the children, instead of spending that money on improving the quality and the resilience of kinship care?
The simple reality is that the number of people who are in a position to actually put their hands up to be kin carers is not significantly high. Many of the people who are already doing that already have 2 or 3 children that they're caring for in not formal arrangements, and many of the people who want to assist with kinship care are already exhausted taking care of the children that they already have living with them. What we have to do is make it easier for those people to be supported. We've absolutely made the commitment to listen to them, and much of what has driven this reform has come from the Foster and Kinship Care Association of the Northern Territory, the people who are there front and centre doing the work, caring for often their family. Others are caring for children who are almost family. They've been entrusted with the care of children by Aboriginal parents who just felt that they needed that extra support. So I think one of the things...
If I may just put a simple question to you. Have you increased funding to early intervention?
So what we've done for kinship carers is we've increased the amount of funding that is available to them when they take a child into care. So it hadn't increased for 12 years. We've increased it from $200 to $1,000. We've done a 10% uplift in carer payments. And the early intervention work is the work that will be driven by the changes in the legislation that's just been passed.
One of the key issues that's emerged from the report into the tragic circumstances surrounding the death of Kumanjayi Little Baby is the difficulty in the Northern Territory of recruiting and keeping frontline child protection staff. As of today, how many vacant roles are there?
So when I came into the portfolio, we had a 40% vacancy rate. We have been able to reduce that to 20% over the last few months. There's a huge amount of work being done around workforce, and one of the directions I've given the department is we need to create a pathway that gives people who want to work in child protection the ability to do the really hard work at what I call the pointy end, but also to do the work at the early intervention point. And that means that people working in child protection are able to rotate through roles to get a break from the really difficult cases when they need to. And hopefully that means that they'll be better able and well supported to be able to continue in those roles. And I can tell you, I have nothing but admiration for people who choose child protection as a career path. It is an incredibly difficult area to work in, and the changes that we're making is critical from the point of view that we want them to feel like they're able to shift the balance, so they're not constantly reacting to a crisis, but they're able to actually get involved and stop the crisis from actually happening.
Robyn, Cahill, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.